Welcome to App Stories, a weekly show about the world of apps from Mac Stories. Today's episode is brought to you by Sofa. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
Doing really well today. We had a good conversation during the pre-show all about iPhone mirroring on the Mac. So how it ties into the EU, the DMA, what's going on with the Mac in general and its software, all the big issues. I feel like iPhone mirroring, it's really the center of the universe. It's where all the controversy is right now in the Apple ecosystem. It's not all this AI nonsense. It's not the DMA itself. It's iPhone mirroring. That's what people want to, that's what people are fired up about.
Yeah, because obviously, under the DMA, why just iPhone mirroring? People want Android mirroring, It's
they do.
Anti-competitive.
I want Chromebook mirroring is what I want. I want my Chromebook apps.
Look, I want
Mac.
Steam Deck mirroring, okay? That's what I want.
Oh, all right. It's going to be a long, hot DMA summer, as they say.
Oh, boy. It's going to be a long DMA year, I think.
That's for sure.
So you had a fun idea for this week's episode of App Stories. Now we've been doing, John, App Stories for how long? Since 2016?
2017, actually.
2017, so 7 years. And during the past 7 years, we've had our, classic App Stories episodes, like the Pick 2, the first impressions of the betas, the WWDC keynote first impressions, those types of episodes that every once in a while we do. And those are like classics on App Stories. Now, you had an idea for what could become in the future another App Stories classic, but now it's not because it's a new idea. Can you tell us about this idea?
Yes, this new episode, this classic in waiting is called The Tip Jar. Federico and I are going to lay down some tips related to any apps that we're using and or the OSs and share them with listeners.
Yeah, so if you're seeing this episode title in your podcast client, we're not looking for actual tips in a tip jar.
No, we're not. Buy me a coffee.
Hey, if you want, you can sign up for a Club Premier membership that gives you access to App Stories Plus in addition to all that we do with the club, or you can sign up for App Stories Plus. But no, we do not have a literal tip jar where you can drop your cents or whatever.
No, we're giving the tips to the people. They're not giving the tips to us. That's what this is all about.
The jar is coming from inside the podcast.
Yes, it is.
you know. So, okay. So, I have a few. Since you told me about this episode idea, I saved a bunch of suggestions, and I guess I'll get started.
Okay.
Just I'm going in random order here. I'm just picking from these things that I have. I will start with iPadOS, and I will mention a tip for window management on iPadOS. What I'm about to say, although it is a tip, it doesn't mean that I agree with Apple's implementation. I'm just telling you how to do it. One of the things that I think I personally struggle with, and I see a lot of folks struggling with when it comes to using iPadOS, is how do you add a new window for an app that you're using on top of the window that you are already using?
It is not obvious.
It's not obvious. In practical terms, so let's say that you're using Notes and you're like, hey, I want to have another Notes window. Well, how do you do it? There's no menu bar on iPadOS. There's no system-wide, recognized everywhere keyboard shortcut that you can use. Well, how do you do it? The easiest way on iPadOS to add a new window for an app that supports multiple windows, because it's not a given that an iPad app supports multiple windows. But the easiest way to do it is make sure you have that app in your dock and use drag and drop. So if you're using Notes and you're taking notes and suddenly you realize, I need to have another Notes window, grab the Notes icon from your dock, drag it onto the display, onto the main window, and onto, on top of the other Notes window, I guess. And it will create a brand new window for the Notes app. Now, I mentioned the dock because it's the fastest way to do it. The dock is always right there in iPadOS, especially if you're using Stage Manager. The dock is always visible, so you can just grab an icon, drag it on top of the other window, and it will create a fresh window for you. But you can also do it using Spotlight. So if you want to invoke Spotlight using Command Space, then grab the icon, drag it onto the other window, and it will create a new window. Now, is it counterintuitive that the only way to always make sure you're creating a new window is to use drag and drop? Yes. Should there be like some kind of menu bar with a proper menu? Or should there be like a system-wide keyboard shortcut that always creates a new window? Also, yes. But this is how you do it now. You got to use drag and drop.
Yeah, the drag and drop is very counterintuitive for anybody coming from the Mac, because if you drag something out of your dock, on a Mac, it's no longer in your dock. It works very differently. But yeah, that is a good tip. My first tip, Federico, is related to an app called Dropover on the Mac. And Dropover is an app that it's at its most basic. You can take a file in the Finder, grab it with your pointer and shake it a little bit left and right and drop it onto a shelf. It's a temporary parking place. It's a very good app for moving files around to different folders and that sort of thing. But you can do a lot more with Dropover. It's got a lot of other features. And one of my favorites that I've been using a lot lately is you can use Dropover to monitor specific folders in the Finder. And that when anything is added to that folder, it automatically gets added to one of the shelves in Dropover. And what I've been monitoring is my downloads folder, because I download stuff all the time, whether it's images for stories or apps or, I don't know, articles, whatever it happens to be, PDFs, that sort of thing. Now what I do is I have Dropover monitor that downloads folder. Whenever something gets downloaded, it automatically appears hovering over all my other windows in the Dropover shelf. I can then do whatever I want with it. I can put it where it needs to go. I can open it up in an app and use it. And then when I'm finished, because a lot of the times my downloads folder is full of temporary stuff that I'm not going to keep, there is a menu item you can choose from the shelf itself to send that thing directly to the trash. And I have found that this has been a really good way to get better control over my downloads folder, so it just doesn't end up with hundreds and hundreds of screenshots and other random things that I've downloaded off the internet. So that's the tip itself. There's like a little bonus to this, which is there is a new feature that's in beta that doesn't work quite right yet, but I'm really interested to see if the developer can nail it, which is Dropover can be used to monitor your screenshots folder and put your screenshots on the shelf too, which is another great, it's similar kind of idea where you're monitoring those screenshots so you can use them right away and then get rid of them if you don't need them, which is something that I'd like to do. It does have trouble with if you have the thumbnails that appear on the desktop, whether you're using the macOS system feature, which does those thumbnails, or something like CleanShot, which can have thumbnails that sit on your desktop. That does tend to mess up this feature right now. And so it's in beta. And the one way to kind of deal with that is to set it so that those features are disabled, so nothing ever sits as a thumbnail on your desktop. But I do kind of like the feature of having CleanShot put something on my desktop. So right now I'm not using this feature, but I do love it for monitoring my downloads folder.
That's very nice. Okay, so I think I'm gonna blow your mind with my next tip.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident. So I think I mentioned this before. This will be an article on Mac Stories sometime this summer. I'm using the Meta Ray-Ban glasses as my everyday glasses now because I got transition lenses with prescription, which means I can wear them all day, indoors and outdoors. And I am absolutely loving them for reasons that I will explain in a story. But one of the things that were driving me crazy when I got them was that one of the things I love about the Meta Ray-Bans is that I can use them as AirPods replacements. I can use them to listen to music, or listen to podcasts, and have phone calls or watch YouTube videos, whatever. And whenever I would go outside or, just mind my own business, walking around the house doing things at full volume, I would get those headphone safety notifications on my phone telling me, hey, you should turn down your volume. And although I appreciate those notifications, I think they apply less when you're wearing something like the Ray-Bans that are not like actually sitting inside of your ears.
Right.
They're more like beaming audio down into your ears, but from outside, because the speaker is in the arms of the glass. You're not putting something actually inside of your ear, like AirPods,
Right.
for example. And plus, I mean, if I want to destroy my hearing, that should be my decision. I mean, obviously, I do not recommend it, but I felt like with these glasses, those notifications were just annoying. And so I thought, well, there's got to be a way to turn them off. And I thought, obviously, I guess I'm going to go into settings, sounds and haptics, headphone, what's it called? Let me look again. So I thought I'm going to go into sounds and haptics, headphone safety, reduce loud audio, turn that option off, and surely those notifications would stop.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't stop.
Oh.
So it turns out there is a proper way to make sure that if you want to, this is opt-out, I guess. If you want to, you can disable those notifications that tell you the volume is too high, you should turn it down. And
Can I
you need
guess
to do
where
it.
it is? Can I guess where it is?
You can guess where it is.
Is it in the Health app?
No. It's in a sub-menu of accessibility.
Oh.
Specifically, you need to go into settings, accessibility. Now stay with me here. Audio and visual.
Yeah.
Then you need to go scroll the page and disable the option with a toggle called headphone notifications. So once again, accessibility, audio and visual, turn off the toggle next to headphone notifications, and those notifications will stop. So now I can use my Meta Ray-Bans at full volume, and I don't get, lectured by my iPhone that the volume is too high every 20 minutes or so.
You should keep a running list in Obsidian of all the little accessibility things that you've tweaked, because like 5 years from now, there'll be a new feature, and having turned that off, you will wonder why it doesn't work. Just like you had the problem with the Apple Pencil Squeeze, right? Because you had turned something off years ago.
It was an accessibility option that I had turned off like 3 years ago and forgot about it. And yeah, I was squeezing on my Apple Pencil and it wasn't working. And it turns out that setting somehow was related to the Pencil Pro. Yeah, that's a good idea.
You asked me what I use Obsidian for. That's the kind of reference note that you should have. It's all the crazy things you've changed. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Sofa, the app that helps you be more intentional with your downtime by creating lists of things to watch, read, play, and more. Most of the apps that we use today for productivity are designed around work, getting things done for your job. Sofa's not like that. It's for your free time. But that's what I absolutely love about it, because my free time is limited. And when I sit down to do something, Sofa's right there to help me figure out what I have time for and what I want to do. I don't have to think about it very hard. I just open the app and I can browse through my lists and see what I want to do. Sofa is more organized than the list in a notes app too. It brings a level of sanity and flexibility to how you spend that downtime. You can add basically anything. You can add apps and books, movies, TV, music, podcasts, YouTube videos, websites, and even locations, places you want to travel or restaurants you want to go to, for instance. Sofa provides a simple but powerful level of customization too, ranging from how the app looks and feels to how it works. There are things like ingredients, which are special metadata that you can add to items, smart lists, over 100 themes, shortcut support, and a bunch more stuff on top of that. On top of all that, the majority of Sofa is completely free to use. You can create unlimited lists, sync your data with iCloud, track your activities, and automate with shortcuts. But for more power, you can upgrade to a Super Sofa plan. That adds things like ingredients, smart lists, pinning items and lists, adding sticky notes to items, and other things. Sofa is available on the iPhone and iPad, and it's coming to the Vision Pro and Mac soon too. Right now, listeners of App Stories can get 40% off a Super Sofa annual plan for your first year by going to sofahq.com/app stories. Again, that URL to get 40% off your first year of a Super Sofa annual plan is sofahq.com/app stories. Our thanks to Sofa for their support of the show. All right, let me move on. I've got my tips are all over the place, Federico, but this one is about managing your laptop backups because, of course, everybody should back up, whether it's on Time Machine or, something like Carbon Copy Cloner onto a drive. And I've always found that making backups of laptops is a pain. And one way that I've reduced the pain, I haven't eliminated it entirely, but when it comes to Time Machine backups, I do them over Wi-Fi to a Mac Mini server that I have in a closet. And that is not ideal, only because the drive in, say, like my MacBook Air is 2 terabytes. It's not full or anything, but it takes a very long time to do that over Wi-Fi. So here I would suggest using the app Amphetamine to keep your screen awake and not allow your Time Machine backup to time out at some point. I do that quite a bit now, and it works quite well. I try to do it maybe once a week or so. A lot of times it'll back up if I'm using the laptop a lot in a particular week, but if I get behind and it's got hundreds of gigabytes of backups to do, sometimes just enabling Amphetamine and walking away and coming back and seeing if the Time Machine is finished is the best way to go. And then the other tip is for local backups. And I want to specifically call out the Samsung T9 SSD, which it's an external SSD that has USB-C 3.2 2x2, which is the important point here because that's pretty fast. These are not cheap drives, but you can get them up to 4 terabytes. And plugging those in, you can use an app like Carbon Copy Cloner, which is what I've been using. And Carbon Copy Cloner will prompt you to start a backup when it sees the drive attached. And it will also send you prompts if a certain amount of time has passed and you haven't done a backup. So what I do is I keep a couple of those drives for the 2 laptops in the house. And every now and then I get bugged by Carbon Copy Cloner. You need to do this. I plug it in, and because those drives are so fast, it rarely takes more than a couple of minutes to back up, and then I'm on my way. Because one thing I don't like is having a drive dangling off my laptop. It's one of those things that makes portability more difficult. And by being able to do it this way, I can just do the backup quickly, eject the drive, and go on with my day.
Nice. My next tip is also about iPadOS. You can apply it to iOS as well, but because I'm going to mention a keyboard shortcut, I'm counting it as iPadOS. Stop using raw HTTPS URLs in Apple Mail. Use hyperlinks instead. Mm-hmm. This has been a feature for the past couple of years. And, it used to be that if you wanted to hyperlink something in the Mail app, well, you couldn't. You just had to paste the raw URL of a web page from Safari into a Mail message if you wanted to send that message from iOS or iPadOS. macOS has offered hyperlink support forever, basically for the past decades, I guess. But this is a recent addition to the Mail app. Now on the iPad, it works just like on the Mac. All you need to do is copy a link, select a word in the body text of your message that you want to link to something else, and press Command K on your external keyboard if you're using a keyboard with your iPad. And that's the same keyboard shortcut that you can use on macOS to hyperlink something. Command K, a pop-up is displayed where you can paste your link, and when you click Add, that word gets hyperlinked to something else. Now, obviously, there's also a touch-first way to do this. That is also how you do it on iOS, because most people wouldn't use an external keyboard with their iPhones. You can find a link button in the Mail toolbar right above the keyboard that allows you to also hyperlink something. And I'm pretty sure that if you select a word that you want to hyperlink, you will see in the action menu, which I'm pretty sure the action menu is the new word, is the new proper term for the copy and paste menu. It's no longer officially called copy and paste menu because it does a lot more than just copy and paste. It's where you can find translation, for example. But yeah, you will also find an add link button in that copy and paste menu as well. So plenty of options to hyperlink words in Apple Mail. Don't use raw HTTPS links anymore because they look ugly, and it's much nicer with hyperlinks.
All right, Federico, I have a tip that's going to blow your mind because this isn't just macOS or iPadOS or iOS. This is all the OSs. It's Windows, it's Android, it's everything. And I am going to recommend an app that you've heard me talk about before called Tailscale. And
yes.
What Tailscale lets you do is set up a sort of like a personal VPN. You're setting up your own private network of connected devices. And Tailscale works on basically every OS. I mean, it's even on tvOS. And one thing that I've found it incredibly useful for is dealing with my Android and Windows gaming devices, because what I can do is install Tailscale on, say, my Odin 2 and my Legion Go from Lenovo, which is a Windows device. And then if I have ROMs on my Mac or my iPhone or my iPad, wherever they happen to be, I can shoot them over to those other devices without having to deal with plugging micro SD cards in and out and doing all that kind of thing, because it works basically just like AirDrop. There's a share sheet extension on all the platforms of Apple's devices where you can select the files in the Files app, use the share sheet, select Tailscale, and then select the device you want to send it to, and it sends it. And then it will appear typically in a downloads folder on those other devices. I find it just a really handy way to move information cross-platform without having to worry too much about, am I going to do this with Dropbox? Am I going to do this by, using a micro SD card, whatever it happens to be? It's a really useful way to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a forever weekend project of mine, setting up Tailscale.
It can be there's a lot of fun and complicated things you can do with Tailscale. My uses are pretty limited to things like what I just described, as well as opening up my network to a select number of international users.
Well, okay, let's see. My next tip is also about I want to follow up on that thing about the copy and paste menu.
Okay.
And this is specifically about the iPhone, although I believe it also works on the iPad. You know how sometimes on the iPhone you want to paste something at the beginning of a sentence and you just cannot figure out how to place the cursor there and invoke the copy and paste menu, because text selection can be weird on the iPhone, especially for something that is right along the left edge of the display. And you try to tap with your finger, and instead of placing the cursor before the first letter, you're like placing it after, and you're wasting 30 seconds, and then you just give up. Now, let me tell you about a hidden gesture to invoke the copy and paste menu without having to do that. This is something that I use all the time on your iPhone, but also on your iPad. Tap with 3 fingers in any text field, and you will get a copy and paste menu that also includes undo and redo buttons, by the way. And that's all you need to do. Just tap with 3 fingers, and you have this special version of the copy and paste menu with undo and redo options, so that you don't have to always shake your phone to undo something. You can just place down 3 fingers and you get that menu.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that that's there. I have a couple of tips for people who use Feedbin and RSS. And one of my favorite things about Feedbin is its ability to create a special RSS feed of all your starred items. And this is something I've been using a lot because once you can create an RSS feed from other RSS feeds, you're really kind of, you've got galaxy brain stuff that can happen. Because what I do is I find it tedious when I'm reading through all my feeds, because I have a lot of feeds, hundreds of feeds that I'm looking through. I find it really tedious to constantly be going through the share sheet and adding them to whatever app it is that I want to use for later, whether it's, Good Links or Reader or whatever it happens to be. So instead, what I do is most RSS clients make it very easy to star something. And so I go through using Reader by Silvio Rizzi, and I just star all the things I want to check out later. And that creates a feed that I can then subscribe to in another app. So this is like the secondary inbox for my RSS. I usually send it to Readwise Reader because it has the ability to monitor RSS feeds. And then when I go to go into that app to do some, sit down and do some reading, I can go to the feeds. I can see everything I starred. And from there, I can either just read it right in line, or I can move it somewhere else, tag it, put it in the later, in the library, whatever I'm doing. But it's a really nice way to get all the junk out of Reader and have a place where just the things that I want to read later are, without spending a lot of time tapping around in the share sheet. So this will work with, things like Matter. It will work with Readwise Reader, as I said. If you want to have your stuff accessible in an app on Android or Windows, it can be used for that too, since RSS is universal. You could even connect this up with something like DevonThink and archive all your starred stuff into a DevonThink database. So there's a lot of things you can do with this particular kind of feed. The second thing about Feedbin, this is more particular to Feedbin, which is it has really great saved searches. And I find these really useful to use because you can create a search in the web interface for Feedbin, probably in its app too, but I don't use its app. And then it just shows up in the feed reader that you use, even if it's not a Feedbin feed reader. So I have, for instance, right now, I have one for Sequoia. I just search for the word Sequoia and it populates a saved search, and I can look in Reader and see every day if someone's written a new article about Sequoia that I want to check out. So those are my Feedbin suggestions.
That's a great tip. Okay, so my final one is going to be about a feature of all the Apple operating systems that I think a lot of people should use more in case they sort of, wrote it off a few years ago. And that feature is QuickNote. Now, QuickNote is incredible for a variety of reasons. The most obvious reason is that it's by far the fastest and most inclusive capturing system for any kind of information that you can find on Apple's operating systems. You can use QuickNote and invoke QuickNote to save text, to save a screenshot, to paste a link, to drag a photo or a video from the Photos app. You can drop whatever you want in there and it'll get saved in the Notes app. And because the Notes app has synced privileges that other apps don't have, a few seconds later, you will find that note on your other devices, like an iPhone or an iPad, if you're doing this on a Mac, for example. Now, on a Mac and iPad, it couldn't be easier to use QuickNote. You can just press Globe Q, that is the system-wide keyboard shortcut to invoke QuickNote, and anywhere you are, a little pop-up will appear in the bottom right corner of your display, allowing you to save whatever you want. But QuickNote has more tricks up its sleeve. For example, it has support for capturing deep links of whatever you're looking at in compatible apps. So for example, in Safari, let's say you're looking at a web page in Safari and you invoke QuickNote, you will see an add link button in the QuickNote window that lets you easily capture a rich link for that web page. However, if you're also using an app, like a third-party app on your iPhone or iPad that supports user activities, such as, looking at a place in Apple Maps, or looking at, I believe it also works with documents in working copy, for example, like any app that can dip link to something inside of the app, that dip link you can save with one click using QuickNote. QuickNote is also getting better in iOS 18 if you have the beta installed, because now not only can you obviously customize Control Center and make the QuickNote toggle much more prominent than before, but you can also, because of the Controls API in iOS 18, you can put a QuickNote toggle on your lock screen. And that's exactly what I've done. I have a QuickNote button at the bottom of the lock screen where the camera and flashlight buttons used to be. And now that's like a one-tap way to, I can just press that button, my phone unlocks, and I'm ready to type something. You can also obviously use a shortcut and turn that shortcut into a lock screen widget that you can install under the system clock. And the final thing I will mention about QuickNote is that you can repurpose it as a clipboard manager of sorts. Because the QuickNote floating window is always going to float about whatever you're doing, if you find yourself in a situation, for example, on your iPad, where you need to copy both an email address and a person's name, because you need to look them up somewhere, and you don't want to do the whole switching between apps dance, you're like, can I just copy these two things at once? And normally you can't, because there's no clipboard manager on the iPad.
Right.
What I do now is I just press Command Q and I copy the person's name, and then I paste into the floating panel. I copy the email address, I paste it into QuickNote, I switch to the other app that I need to use, and then, both of those items are right there in the QuickNote floating panel, because I'm using it effectively as a system-wide scratch pad where I can copy and paste stuff without having to move between multiple apps. It's incredibly flexible. It supports all kinds of media types. It's getting even better in iOS and iPadOS 18 because Notes now supports calculations. It supports voice recordings. QuickNote is incredible. And, whether you have a quick idea that you want to save or an image or whatever, my advice would be try and use it more, because it's one of the best system-wide features.
Well, that's, I think you've sold me on it. I think I'm going to have to give it a try, because I like the idea of it being my scratch pad, because there's so much stuff that I collect during the course of a day, right? Whether it's URLs or little thoughts or images that I want to use for something. That's a great idea. All right. I'm going to close out today with two Mastodon services that I think can make using Mastodon a lot better. The first one is Echo Feed by Rob Knight, who's done a bunch of development work for us at Mac Stories, because Echo Feed is an app that allows you to cross-post against a lot of different services. So it's not Mastodon specific, but Mastodon is a big part of it because it incorporates Mastodon. I know he's working on Threads. It works with micro.blog, works with GitHub. It basically lets you create templates for each of those different services, including text URLs, images, whatever the service supports. Oh, it works with Blue Sky too, I believe, and lets you just set that up. And when something hits one of your RSS feeds, for instance, if you have a blog, it will automatically post the appropriate information to each of those different services. So it works really well with Mastodon along with all those other things. The second is Mastodon, more Mastodon specific, which is Bookmarks RSS. And I'll have to put a link in the show notes because it's bookmark-rss.woodland.cafe. And what it does is it creates an RSS feed of your bookmarks in Mastodon, which I find handy too, because it allows me, as I'm looking through Mastodon, if I'm just kind of going through really quickly and seeing if there are any interesting links or people are pointing out bugs in an OS or whatever it happens to be, I can bookmark it and then find it again quickly just by going through my RSS, because that's kind of where I do my reading anyway. And if someone's got a more involved post that has a link and maybe an explanation and maybe a video or some screenshots, it's nice to be able to go back to that in my RSS reader and do it that way instead of like digging back through Ivory or another Mastodon client and looking for my bookmarks. So bookmarks RSS, I don't use it a lot, but it is handy to have it there because I know that I can always just bookmark something and find it pretty quickly. All right, Federico, that's it for another episode of App Stories. You can find the two of us over at macstories.net. We are on Mastodon. Just go to viticci.macstories.net and johnvorhees.macstories.net. You can find us on Threads and Instagram, where Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.